On a hot spring morning, 19-year-old Barbara Barkley arrived for work at the furniture store owned by her fiancé's family in Pinellas Park, Florida. The day began as normal, with Barbara unlocking the doors and dragging a few pieces of display furniture outside. But what happened after that has remained a mystery for more than 40 years. That afternoon, Barbara's brother dropped by the store. He found the doors unlocked, but his sister was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no indications of a crime, but something simply didn't feel right. When Barbara's brother found her purse and cigarettes left behind, but her car gone, he knew something bad had to have happened. Barbara wouldn't have left the store that way, nor would she have left her purse and smokes behind. A massive search failed to turn up any answers, but soon investigators would be contacted by a man who claimed to have seen an unidentified individual driving Barbara's car the day she vanished. Had Barbara been another victim in an unsolved string of women being targeted from their places of work, or could someone closer to home have specifically targeted the 19-year-old? This is Trace Evidence, episode 197, The Vanishing of Barbara Barkley. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine the mysterious disappearance of 19-year-old Barbara Barkley from Pinellas Park, Florida in May of 1981. Before getting into the case, just a few quick notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow the show on social media on Twitter @TraceEvPod, Instagram @TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merch, there's a Patreon at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate directly via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donation options, and contact information. You can submit case suggestions through the website or email me directly at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. For 19-year-old Barbara Barkley, things were beginning to go her way. She graduated high school, got engaged, and picked up a job working for her fiancé's family. Always close with her mother, Barbara called daily to chat about life, until one hot spring day when she mysteriously disappeared. This is episode 197, The Vanishing of Barbara Barkley. It was a hot, sticky morning in Pinellas Park, Florida. The ghost of a breeze sailed in from the northwest, offering a momentary reprieve from the growing heat of the sun as temperatures reached nearly 90 degrees well before afternoon would even begin. 19-year-old Barbara Barkley strode out of her St. Petersburg apartment and climbed into her Plymouth Fury and made the 20-minute drive north to Pinellas Park, where she worked at a furniture store owned by her fiancé's family. Parking in her normal spot, Barbara stepped out from the car and brushed back her long, dark hair as she approached the front doors, the keys dangling in her hand. Barbara slipped the key into the lock and twisted until she heard that familiar click, pulling the doors open and disappearing inside. She was set to begin the opening routine, one she had grown familiar with as she opened the store by herself 5 days a week. Inside, she'd ensure the register was ready to go before dragging a few pieces of display furniture outside, setting them up to try and draw in passers-by who might be tempted to check out the new pieces. On slow days, which were more often than not, Barbara would spend a lot of her time outside, relaxing in one of those chairs and catching some sun. On this day in particular, she may have been looking forward to the relaxation and tanning, dressed in what a witness would later describe as a strapless sunsuit. Moving back to her car, Barbara opened the door and pulled a small black and white television, carrying it into the store. When the customers were few and far between, and she wasn't looking to work on her tan, Barbara would hang out inside at her desk, watching morning talk shows and chain smoking. Marlboro Reds were her preference, and she never went anywhere without a smoke and a lighter. Everything appeared to be following the normal order of business. Barbara was now faced with several hours of waiting to see if anyone would stop by, or if it would be another slow, boring day filled with cigarettes and the same old shows doing the same old thing. Normally, on her lunch break, Barbara would head across the street for a soda and a sandwich, maybe even a slice of pizza. Then she'd walk across to the bank of payphones from which she'd make several calls, most often to her fiancé. However, not a day ever passed where she didn't check in with her mother until this hot Friday afternoon in May of 1981. Bernard Barkley, Barbara's older brother, planned to stop by and visit with his sister that afternoon. He'd hit a rough patch recently, having lost his job, and moved in with Barbara while he hunted for new career opportunities. Driving back to the area from Tampa, Bernard pulled into the vacant lot and made the short walk into the quiet furniture store with a giant orange chair sitting on the roof. He found the doors unlocked, but the store empty. Barbara's television was still tuned into a morning talk show. Her purse and cigarettes were lying on her desk, but she and her car were gone. Bernard didn't initially think anything was wrong. Perhaps Barbara had gone out for a quick errand. Maybe she was off getting her lunch. Figuring she'd be back any minute, he sat down and waited. Half an hour later, with no sightings of Barbara, Bernard began to worry. Looking around the store, he didn't see anything that immediately screamed that she might be in trouble, but he couldn't shake the feeling. Over the course of the next few hours, he'd ask local business owners if they'd seen Barbara, but none had. He'd call friends, family, and anyone he could think of, but no one knew where Barbara might be. Finally, after exhausting every avenue, he'd pick up the phone and make the call every family member dreads, filing a missing persons report with the Pinellas Park Police Department. When the report hit the desk of Sergeant Ed McReynolds, he was instantly concerned. Was this random, or was it connected to the other missing women? Barbara Jean Barkley was born on Tuesday, December 19, 1961, to parents Gloria and Bernard. Barbara was the family's second-born child and first daughter, her older brother Bernard having been born 2 years earlier. It would actually end up being her brother who created his younger sister's nickname. As a youngster, Bernard struggled to properly enunciate the name Barbara, so he began referring to her as Bobbie, a name that stuck with her for the rest of her life. Bobbie has been described as a bright, fun-loving, caring, and beautiful young woman with friends and family frequently commenting on her long, dark hair and dark eyes. It appears even from a young age, Bobbie drew in attention from family and strangers alike. Gloria stated in multiple interviews that throughout much of her childhood, she would often be complimented on how pretty her daughter was and how similar the two looked. Not a great deal of information has been shared about Bobbie's early years, though her mother and brother have said that she was a very active child who loved riding her bike and swimming. She developed a love for music at a young age and was quickly swept up by the worldwide phenomenon that was Elvis Presley, decorating her bedroom walls with pictures of the musician. Raised in a Catholic household, Bobbie attended church with her family, and in addition to photos of Elvis, she'd also handwrite the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary, taping them to her bedroom walls as well. Outside of religion and music, the next closest thing to Bobbie's heart were animals, specifically horses. She loved horses and dreamed of one day owning one. Gloria would later tell the Tampa Bay Times, quote, "From the time she was able to think about them, she's always said she wants a horse. So every time I buy her something, if it's not Elvis Presley, it's got something to do with horses." End quote. Growing up predominantly in the St. Petersburg area, Bobbie loved the Florida weather and was outside almost every opportunity she had, leaving her with an almost permanent tan. Throughout her teen years, she dated a few boys off and on, but nothing developed beyond the bounds of a high school romance. According to friends, Bobbie was frequently approached by other teens looking to take her out, but she was selective in the process, not wanting to waste time going out with someone she didn't have an interest in. Bobbie was a smart young woman, coming of age at the close of the 1970s, and if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that she wanted to break out on her own, to forge her own life. She had little interest in marrying a high school sweetheart and stepping directly into motherhood. Bobbie went on to attend Seminole High School. There, she performed well, pulling in good grades and growing her circle of friends. Many who encountered Bobbie described her as possessing an undefinable charisma. There was just something about her that made people want to spend time with her, whether it was listening to music, driving around looking for fun, or just talking about life, movies, anything that came to mind. In the spring of 1980, Bobbie graduated from Seminole at age 17 and was excited to head out on her own. Still, she was close with her mother and lived with her in her Seminole apartment until the two had a falling out. What exactly caused the divide wasn't revealed. However, it isn't difficult to imagine the clashes that can occur between mother and daughter once adulthood hits, but you're still living under the rules of your parents' house. This estrangement, as Gloria would refer to it, would last for approximately a year, stretching into the holiday season of 1980. During this period, Bobbie experienced a lot of changes in her life. She moved out on her own, renting an apartment in St. Petersburg, not far from where she'd grown up and gone to school. She began dating a man, 27-year-old Dan Ulian, and over the course of the year, things would grow serious between the couple. At the time, Dan's parents owned a series of businesses, one of which was a pipe furniture store located in Pinellas Park. Bobbie would take up work at the store at first, just a few days a week, but eventually she'd work Tuesday through Sunday, opening and closing by herself. In December of 1980, Bobbie and Gloria reconnected, dismissing their falling out and moving forward and forging a stronger bond. Gloria has described her relationship with her daughter more like that of sisters than parent and child. According to Gloria, the two women would discuss everything with each other, from boyfriends to work and everything in between. Oftentimes, they'd hit the gym together and then relax and get pampered at the spa. O'Durkin's pub, at the time located near Gloria's apartment, was a spot they frequently met up at to grab a drink and talk about whatever was going on in their lives. They were in constant contact as, following their fallout, it appeared their relationship was stronger than ever. Gloria explained that the two spoke on the phone 5 to 6 times a day and often made plans to spend time together without any warning. Frequently, the two would be chatting and then decide out of the blue to go out and have dinner together or to grab ice cream sundaes, which were always a popular choice. By the spring of 1981, everything seemed to be going well. The relationship between mother and daughter was healed. Bobbie had gotten engaged to Dan Ulian, and she was excited for the future they would have together. While Bobbie's life was on the rise, her older brother Bernard, 21 at the time, was hitting a bit of a slump. Having lost his job and not being able to afford his own place, Bobbie offered to let him stay with her until he could get back on his feet. Jumping at the opportunity, Bernard moved in and spent a vast majority of his free time hunting for a new job. At night, he and Bobbie would hang out together in the apartment, and the relationship between the two siblings, which had always been close, was growing even stronger. Unfortunately, before the summer could begin, Bobbie would mysteriously vanish. According to local business owners, Bobbie was a known fixture around the Pinellas Park area. Having worked at the furniture store on 66th Street for some time, she got to know a lot of other business owners in the area. Popular, smart, and attractive, it would have been more difficult for someone to have not noticed Bobbie than it would be to get familiar with her routine. Mary Smola, who worked at a pizzeria across the street from the furniture store, noted that she saw Bobbie almost daily when the 19-year-old would drop in around lunchtime for a sandwich and sometimes a slice. Billy Brown, who owned a convenience store next door, told investigators that almost every day around noon, Bobbie would drop in and purchase either a Diet Pepsi or a can of Tab. After lunch, he'd often see her stopping by a bank of payphones just outside of his store where she'd make multiple calls, sometimes to her fiancé, but always to her mother. The two would talk every day on her lunch break. On the morning of Friday, May 29th, though, Bobbie wouldn't follow this daily regimen. That morning, Bernard awoke to get ready and drive up to Tampa, where he had several interviews lined up. He planned on dropping in at other businesses to fill out applications as his search for a new job intensified. At approximately 7:30 a.m., Bernard knocked on his sister's bedroom door and then walked in. Straightening his tie, Bernard told Bobbie that he was heading off, later telling the Times, quote, "I wanted to make sure she locked the door behind me," end quote. He had no way of knowing that this fleeting exchange would be the last time he'd ever see his sister. From what investigators have stated, the rest of the morning seemingly went as it normally would. Bobbie got out of bed a little later and began getting ready for a typically boring Friday at work. Dressed in a strapless terry cloth sunsuit, The 19-year-old grabbed up her small black and white television and loaded it into the back seat of her four-door 1973 Plymouth Fury with a beige body and brown vinyl top. Tucking some cash into her purse and ensuring that she had a full pack of smokes, Bobbie left the St. Petersburg apartment at approximately 9:30 a.m. and made the 25-minute drive over to the furniture store at 9627 66 North, Pinellas Park. It wasn't a huge business by any means. In fact, the store was housed in a small one-story white brick building that could have blended right into the facade of the city, if not for the gigantic orange-colored lawn chair jutting out from the roof. As far as marketing went, most people remembered that orange chair, though whether it was noted more for being a landmark than a place to go shopping is another story entirely. A woman working in a salon across the street from the furniture store would later tell investigators that she saw Bobbie arriving that morning. Reportedly, the young woman pulled into her usual spot at the store and walked up, unlocking the doors and letting herself in. She'd later return to her car, grabbing the black and white TV and bringing it inside where she'd set it on her desk so she could watch morning shows during the slow hours. Suffice it to say, there was never a line of people waiting to get in, and Bobbie had grown accustomed to finding whatever methods necessary to keep herself entertained. When she wasn't sitting at her desk watching TV, Bobbie would sometimes take a few moments to enjoy the Florida weather she loves so much. Part of her job involved bringing out new and interesting furniture pieces and setting them outside in front of the store, in hopes of enticing new shoppers. Bobbie would often use these pieces to her own advantage, stretching out and soaking up some sun during the slower stretches of the day, which, according to friends, were far more frequent than the busy times. This, however, does not appear to have happened on Friday, May 29th. What exactly did occur between the hours of 10 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. remains unknown more than 4 decades later. Mary Smola never saw Bobbie that day. She never showed up at the pizzeria for her customary sandwich. Neither did Billy Brown. Bobbie didn't drop in for a drink that afternoon, nor did he ever see her hanging around the payphones. At the time, there was no reason for concern on either of their parts, as they simply assumed she had taken the day off, or maybe had made different plans for lunch. Either way, after the initial sighting of her unlocking the doors at 10, no one would see Bobbie again. At least, no one other than the person or persons who are responsible for her disappearance. At approximately 1:30 p.m., 3.5 hours after Bobbie had opened the store, Bernard drove into the parking lot to pay a visit to his sister. At the time, he noticed her car wasn't there, though he assumed she may have taken a quick drive to grab some lunch or make a call. Strangely, as he approached the doors, he found them unlocked, and when he called out for his sister, there was no answer. Though he couldn't describe it exactly at the time, a feeling of dread was slowly building up in his gut. It didn't make sense for Bobbie to be gone and the doors to be unlocked. She knew better than that. The display furniture was out front, so he knew Bobbie had been there, but where she was now, he couldn't guess. Walking inside, Bernard approached the desk where he found more indicators that something strange was going on. Bobbie's television was on, tuned to a talk show that droned in the background. The store appeared to be in good order, no signs of a struggle or that anything bad had happened, though there were 2 items that stood out. Lying on the floor near his sister's desk were a small pocket calculator and a pen. This was odd, as everyone who knew Bobbie described her as neat and meticulous. She wouldn't have dropped the items to the floor and simply decided to leave them there. Still, it wasn't exactly a broken window or a knocked-over display, so at the time, Bernard didn't chalk this up as a clear indication that anything was wrong. Inspecting further, it was what Bernard found next that made that feeling of dread grow stronger. Bobbie's purse, with approximately $20 in cash, was sitting on her desk, and just a few inches away was the red and white soft pack of Marlboros that Bobbie never strayed far from. Bernard, who later described his sister as a chain smoker, couldn't imagine a scenario in which Bobbie would have willingly left her smokes behind. In fact, the only time Bobbie didn't have her cigarettes with her would be when she was visiting her mother, who knew her daughter smoked, but didn't approve. According to Bernard, the only items missing from the store were Bobbie's keys and her car, which he noted as having been low on gas at the time. He simply assumed then that she'd gone to grab herself something to eat, so he took a seat and waited, figuring she'd come back. Approximately 30 minutes later, with no signs of Bobbie, Bernard became concerned enough that he needed to try and track down his sister. Rushing over to the phones that Bobbie herself used almost daily, Bernard first dialed his mother. Gloria hadn't heard from Bobbie that day, which was strange because she heard from her several times every day. Also, she was supposed to call and confirm plans they'd made to go to the spa that night. The next call was to her fiancé Dan Ulian, but he hadn't seen or heard from Bobbie since the night before. Moving through the list of friends he could remember, Bernard couldn't find anyone who had seen or heard from Bobbie that day. Hanging the phone back up, he decided to pay a visit to the shopping center where Bobbie usually got her lunch. Speaking to employees and business owners, he couldn't find anyone who had seen his sister after 10 a.m. For hours, he went from store to store looking for answers. When his search radius had expanded beyond what he considered rational, he headed back to the apartment he shared with Bobbie and made more calls, but again, no one had seen or heard from his sister. Finally, at 7 p.m., he decided he had to call the police and report Bobbie missing. When Sergeant Ed McReynolds with the Pinellas Park Police became aware of the report, his mind immediately went to a dark place. 8 months earlier, in September of 1980, 2 different women had disappeared from their jobs. Cynthia Clements disappeared on Monday, September 1st while working a morning shift at a local convenience store. When the police arrived on the scene, they found Cynthia's purse and a half-finished crossword puzzle lying on the counter. A radio, which Cynthia listened to between customers, was still on, but the store was empty. 8 days later, on Tuesday, September 9th, Elizabeth Graham disappeared driving her company's mobile dog grooming van. Elizabeth had driven to a home on a dirt road near the St. Petersburg Clearwater Airport and vanished without a trace. While Elizabeth had never been tracked down, the next month in October, Cynthia Clements' decomposing body was found in a heavily wooded area southeast of Largo. All 3 women were 19 years old. All 3 had long hair, and all 3 had disappeared from their jobs. Sergeant McReynolds' first instinct was to send a team of searchers down to the wooded area where Cynthia Clements' body had been found to begin searching for any signs that someone had been there recently or that Bobbie might have been taken there. McReynolds would later tell the Tampa Bay Times, quote, "That's the first thing that came to mind. I don't feel too good about this. According to the statements made by her brother and her boyfriend, she's not an unstable person. She's reliable. She wouldn't go anywhere without her cigarettes. Her car didn't have much gas. The fact that her purse was left there and her cigarettes were left there leads us to believe foul play could be involved." End quote. The next morning, Saturday, May 30th, Sergeant McReynolds organized and directed a search through a wooded area not far from the furniture store. According to reports of the time, 2 teenage boys reported to police that they had witnessed 2 men digging a pit deep in the brush. The teenagers told investigators that the men had an object wrapped in a blanket in the back of their pickup truck, and it was this object that they threw into the pit. The teens described the object as being approximately 5 feet long. Hearing this, McReynolds had a backhoe brought in to clear brush, but they never managed to find any signs of fresh digging or anything connected to Bobbie or any other missing person. The search came as both shocking and startling to Gloria, who, as of that time, hadn't even considered the possibility that something terrible might have happened to her daughter. In fact, she didn't even learn about the search nor the digging until she heard it on the television. She explained to the Times, quote, "I was pretty optimistic until I saw that newscast, and that scared me a lot. I didn't think they would even do something like that without notifying the family first. It was just so sudden to be looking at the TV and all of a sudden they're digging up someplace." End quote. As the wooded search was being conducted, the Pinellas Park Police issued a statewide bulletin giving a description of Bobbie, the last place she was seen, and a description of her vehicle. Detectives spoke to all of her friends and family members, none of whom had seen her that Friday. A check of local hospitals failed to turn up anyone matching Bobbie's description, and so the statewide alert was aimed at locating her should she be in another county or perhaps a hospital outside of the Pinellas Park jurisdiction. According to Sergeant McReynolds, they would next be interviewing employees and business owners in the area to determine whether or not anyone saw her or anything suspicious after 10 a.m. Friday morning. In addition to interviews and ground searches, police employed several pilots who flew over the area in search of any signs of Bobbie. Unfortunately, that first weekend would pass with few, if any, developments, but all of that would change on the morning of Monday, June 1st. A man described only as a friend of Bobbie's was driving along US 19 near Gulf to Bay Boulevard, approximately 3 miles from his home, when he spotted a vehicle that closely resembled Bobbie's. Pulling into the parking lot of a Clearwater rock club, Studio 19, the man approached the car and confirmed that the license plate, JZT780, was in fact Bobbie's. Looking over the car, the man noted that the driver's side window was down and the keys were dangling from the ignition, perhaps hoping that someone would steal it. Quickly, he notified police, and within a short period of time, the parking lot was swarming with officers from the Pinellas Park Police Department. As news of the car's discovery hit the airwaves, investigators were contacted by a man who claimed not only to have seen Bobbie's car being driven the afternoon of her disappearance, but he'd also gotten a good look at the driver, and it definitely was not Bobbie. This witness told investigators that on Friday afternoon at approximately 2:30 p.m., he was at a self-serve car wash along US 19 in Newport Richey when he saw Bobbie's car and a man driving it. This car wash was located approximately 20 miles north from where the car would ultimately be found and 7 miles north of the furniture store. According to the witness, a man drove into the car wash behind the wheel of Bobbie's Plymouth Fury. After a moment, the driver limped over towards the witness and offered him cash to wash his car for him. The unidentified man had a bandage wrapped around one of his legs, which he told the witness made it difficult for him to clean the car himself. Asked for further details of the vehicle, the witness stated that there was a bumper sticker on the rear which read, "Single and loving it," while on the front there was a crooked vanity plate reading Bobbie. In addition, the witness told police that he saw a Jackson Browne cassette tape in the car's stereo. All of these were features of Bobbie's vehicle, which had not previously been reported to the public. Initially, the witness gave investigators a rough description of the man, which was then transformed into a composite image they hoped to get out to the public. But Sergeant McReynolds wasn't very happy with the final product, telling the Times, quote, "A composite, by nature, is not that accurate," end quote. In hopes of getting greater detail, investigators turned to private investigator Dan Quilligan, who agreed to hypnotize the witness. Under hypnosis, the witness once again described the driver while a sketch artist put pencil to paper. The witness described the man as being a white male in his mid to late 20s with white blonde hair, standing approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighing around 160 pounds. The witness said that the man appeared to be attempting to grow a lightly colored beard. Incredibly, when the composite was completed and circulated to local law enforcement agencies, a sheriff's detective working with the Pinellas Park Police believed he recognized the man as resembling a suspect in a previous assault that the sheriff's department had investigated. Everett Rice, then director of investigations for the sheriff's office, reported that on Saturday, May 23rd, just 6 days before Bobbie's disappearance, a woman working alone at a model home 6 blocks north of the furniture store was assaulted by a man fitting the same description. According to Rice, the man entered the model home and pushed and punched the female victim before running off. The similarities in appearance, as well as the targeting of lone women at work, led investigators to believe there might be a link, with Rice telling the Times, quote, "We're working on the assumption that this is the same man," end quote. While investigators were attempting to track down the suspect shown in the composite, others were awaiting the results of a search and analysis of Bobbie's car. The vehicle had been transferred to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's lab in Tampa. While police would acknowledge that they found nothing concrete to confirm foul play had taken place, there were several details about the car and its contents which drew concern. In the rear seat of the car, police found 2 cushions draped across the bench. One had been taken from a porch swing at the store, though where the second one had come from no one knew. At the time, Police weren't willing to speculate about the cushions, though rumors quickly began circulating that the cushions had created a so-called makeshift bed in the back seat, suggesting Bobbie may have been sexually assaulted by her abductor. At the time, DNA was not a viable avenue, and investigators never reported finding stains or anything indicating blood or other bodily fluids. Bobbie's fiance, Dan Ulian, was allowed to view the car and pointed out multiple scratches on the side of the vehicle which hadn't been there previously. He also noted that the cushions had not been in the back seat when he last saw the car, the night before Bobbie disappeared. Ulian pointed out that the crooked vanity plate, saying that it was straight the last time he'd seen it. Asked about the car, Dan stated that the scratches made him believe the vehicle had been driven through the woods or dense brush. In terms of the crooked plate, he told the Times, quote, "It looks like someone tried to tear it off. No doubt about it. Someone tried to pry it off." End quote. Dan would sit down for an interview with the Evening Independent to discuss both his relationship with Bobbie and the circumstances of her disappearance. Asked about the location at which her car was found, Studio 19, Dan replied that as far as he knew, Bobbie had never been there, and that normally when they went out together, they'd go to a St. Petersburg lounge or to the movies, specifically horror movies. The couple had been together for around a year and a half, though they'd gotten engaged 6 months earlier. According to Dan, they kept pushing the date back for the wedding until they could figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. In what I can explain, at least contextually, Dan stated that Bobbie, quote, "went out with a couple of different guys, but not very often or for very long," end quote. Asked about the last time he saw his fiancée, Dan explained that the couple had gotten together the night before her disappearance. He picked her up from her place around 10:30 p.m. and they'd gone to Pizza Hut, with Dan saying, quote, "Thursday night, everything was great. We were having a great time. It was one of the best times we've had in a long time. She didn't have any problems Thursday night. She was sort of mad because we ate pizza and she's overweight. She's gained about 15 pounds since we started dating." End quote. According to Dan, after eating dinner, he dropped her off at her apartment around 3 a.m., 4.5 hours before her brother Bernard would see her for the last time. Discussing Bobbie's job at the furniture store, the reporter asked Dan if she ever had any trouble with customers, men in particular. He explained that when she would sunbathe in the display chairs outside, she often had men driving by who would whistle and call out to her. Sometimes it went further, with Dan explaining, quote, "Sometimes people stopped in and got wise, verbally, but she could cool them down pretty quick." End quote. At the conclusion of the interview, Dan offered up a reward for information, though he would not specify a dollar amount. He explained, quote, "If somebody is willing to find her for me, it's worth a lot of money to me. I don't know, maybe somebody has her and wants a ransom. Things look bad. I wish they'd found Bobbie instead of her car. I can always get her another car, but I can never replace her." End quote. Approximately 1 month after Bobbie's disappearance, investigators didn't appear to be any closer to finding her nor the person responsible. Towards the end of June, Gloria sat down for an interview about her daughter, the investigation, and everything in between. During this interview, it was revealed that in the previous 30 days, the Pinellas Park police had received and followed up on more than 100 tips, though none of them brought them any closer to the truth. Their best lead still was the sighting of the man driving Bobbie's car to the car wash on US 19, but his identity remained unknown. Gloria admitted how much she struggled with basic life functions since her daughter vanished, telling the Evening Independent that in the days after, she, quote, "would cry. I would rant. I would rave. The other night I sat here by myself and became hysterical. Sleep only came with the help of Valium after staying up half the night." End quote. Also present for this interview was John Skelly, a 25-year-old tennis player who painted houses so he could afford to play 3 to 4 hours of tennis a day. According to Skelly, he often played at the Indian Springs Tennis Club, and after a good workout, he'd go across the street to a convenience store to grab some orange juice. Prior to working at the furniture store, Bobbie worked at that store and encountered Skelly on more than one occasion. According to him, they warmed up to one another and he would often chat with her after tennis, and sometimes He'd stop by just to say hello. He later explained, quote, "I had kind of a crush on her that I never mentioned," end quote. Skelly went on to say that he and Bobbie had fallen out of touch with one another, likely due to her moving on to a new job, but he never stopped thinking about her. When he learned of her disappearance, he was so moved and distraught that he wanted to get involved. After winning a tennis tournament, he presented the trophy to Gloria, along with a letter he'd written to Bobbie. He wanted to give her the items so that her daughter would have them when she returned home, something Gloria desperately hoped for. She keeps the trophy and letter right next to a high school photo of Bobbie, waiting for the day she gets to see her again. While the investigation into Bobbie's disappearance began growing cold over the summer of 1981, a new crime that October would once again rocket her case into the front pages. On Saturday, October 3rd, 4 months after Bobbie was last seen, 39-year-old Margot Caraway Delleman was reported missing by her employers, Oban Rustic Cedar Homes. Margot worked out of a model log cabin located in Clearwater off 116th Avenue North. According to investigators, they had reason to believe Margot had arrived for work that Saturday morning at approximately 9:30 a.m., though what happened after was unknown. Margot's car, a 1973 four-door Oldsmobile white with a blue vinyl top, was found parked at the model home she worked out of. Jim Brown, a spokesman for the sheriff's department, told reporters that the vehicle hadn't supplied them with any evidence, nor had they discovered any signs of a struggle. When coworkers arrived the next day, on Sunday, they found Margot's car in the lot and the doors unlocked, but no sign of the 39-year-old. Asked about the status of the case, Jim Brown told the Evening Independent, quote, "We have no suspects as yet. We have not listed it as an abduction, but as a missing person under mysterious circumstances," end quote. Sadly, the rest of 1981 would pass without any new developments, leads, or answers when it came to Bobbie's disappearance. Her 20th birthday came and went. No celebration, no presents, no gathering of family. It was a cold, hard holiday, though the hope remained that the new year might bring something, anything, to get investigators back on track. In early January, an arrest was made in another series of cases, which would lead many to wonder if the suspect might have ties to Bobbie. On the morning of Friday, January 8th, real estate agent Donna Maltby was scheduled to meet a potential buyer at a motel in Sanford at 9 a.m. Together, the two planned to drive to a plot of land for the buyer to take a look around and maybe make an offer. Instead, when the man arrived, he convinced Maltby to ride over to the property in his car, and once she got inside, he pulled a knife on her. After pulling over, the man tied Maltby up in the back seat and robbed her of $111. Wanting to take her to Orlando, the suspect untied Maltby so she could guide him to the city as he drove. Maltby managed to convince her assailant to stop and pick her up a drink as they reached the edge of the city. Needing gas, the man pulled into a service station, at which time he experienced trouble starting the car, ultimately realizing that the battery was dead. Maltby spotted deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office on routine patrol and managed to escape from the car, screaming for help. As deputies closed in, the assailant fled the vehicle on foot and was apprehended moments later after a short chase. The suspect, identified as 46-year-old David Longstreet, was charged with kidnapping, armed robbery, and false imprisonment, in addition to grand theft auto and aggravated assault. Pinellas Sheriff Jerry Coleman announced that Longstreet was being questioned in a series of other abductions, including those of Cynthia Clements, Elizabeth Graham, and Barbara Jean Barkley. Sheriff Coleman stated that due to significant similarities between the crime against Maltby and the known details of the other 3 disappearances, Longstreet was considered a possible suspect in all of the cases, though further questioning would be necessary to determine whether or not he could be tied to any of them. While Coleman acknowledged that there was no direct evidence linking Longstreet to the crimes, it was noted at that time that he was living at an address in Pinellas Park, less than 2 miles south of the furniture store from which Bobbie had vanished. In addition to the abductions, Longstreet was also being questioned in connection with the robberies of 2 other female real estate agents over the previous 2 years, both of whom worked out of the Pinellas Park area. Captain Lou Kubler, chief of detectives for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, stated that Longstreet would be questioned thoroughly and closely examined for links to these and any other unsolved crimes that shared similar details. As it would later be discovered, his name was not even David Longstreet, but it would take more than 15 years before he opened up about the crimes he had committed. While he was ultimately sent to prison on charges stemming from the abduction and assault of Donna Maltby, he was unwilling to discuss any other cases at the time. 16 years later, in February of 1998, David R. Longstreet, whose real name was actually James Delano Winkles, was serving a life sentence in Hardy Correctional Facility when he requested to speak with investigators from Pinellas County regarding unsolved homicides and abductions. Reportedly, Winkles was ill and knew he was never going to get out of prison alive. He told investigators that he was suffering from nightmares connected to the rape and murder of 2 separate women. Winkles would go on to confess to the abduction, rape, and murders of both Elizabeth Graham and Margot Delleman. According to his confession, Winkles had seen a young woman who worked for a dog grooming company called the Pampered Poodle between September and July of 1981. Wanting to abduct this woman, Winkles called the company and arranged for dog grooming services, specifically requesting the employee who had caught his attention. He supplied the company with the address of a vacant home, but when the woman arrived, it was not the one he had chosen. Instead, Elizabeth Graham pulled up in the company van, and apparently Winkles decided that even if it wasn't who he wanted, he was going to commit the crime anyway. I should warn you, the following details are disturbing. As soon as Graham exited the van, Winkles attacked her, putting a gun to her head before handcuffing, gagging, and blindfolding her. After stabbing the grooming van's front tire, he placed Graham in the back of his station wagon, where through an arrangement of pillows and cushions he'd created a makeshift bed. He then drove Graham to his grandmother's rural home, where he claims to have kept her alive for 4 days, repeatedly sexually assaulting her. While Winkles claims he originally planned to let Graham go, he said he felt she'd be able to lead police to that house, so he made the decision to kill her. Winkles forced Graham to swallow muscle relaxers until she fell asleep, at which time he grabbed an umbrella to shield himself from the blood spatter as he shot her 3 times in the head. After destroying all traces of Graham in the house, he proceeded on to Pinellas County, where he buried her. 16 days later, though, he returned, dug up her body, and removed her head. Bringing her head back to his home, he washed the skull out in his sink to ensure no bullets remained inside. He then removed the teeth and lower mandible to make identification more difficult before disposing of Graham's head in Steinhatchee River in Lafayette County. Graham's skull was discovered shortly thereafter, but was not positively identified via DNA until the late 1990s. Winkles then targeted Margot Delleman between October 3rd and 21st, 1981. Winkles told investigators he met the real estate agent at an open house viewing. At the time, he asked her out for a drink, and she turned him down. The following day, he asked her out to breakfast to discuss some real estate possibilities, and she agreed to meet with him. Winkles selected rural, remote locations, and when Delleman took him to one of these, he used the benefit of that isolation to strike. Kidnapping Delleman, he held her captive in an abandoned home near his grandmother's house, where he had previously held Graham. Over 4 days, he repeatedly sexually assaulted Delleman before killing her, giving the same reason as with Graham, that she could lead investigators to the house. More than likely, though, Winkles never intended to let any of his victims live. Winkles forced Delleman to swallow as many as 17 sleeping pills, resulting in her death due to an overdose. Again, he buried her body in Pinellas County and waited 16 days before digging her up, this time transferring her remains to Citrus County. A week after that, he again returned and severed the head, removed the teeth, and disposed of the head in Hernando County. Delleman's headless body was found in October of 1981 and positively identified through fingerprints in August of 1983. Her skull was found between these dates in May of 1982, though at the time they could not make a positive ID. While Winkles had been a suspect in both cases, there hadn't been enough evidence to charge him without these confessions. It was ultimately discovered that Winkles had always planned out his crimes, rigging the passenger side door of his car so that victims couldn't escape while he was driving. He also used to bring an abduction kit with him that contained rope, handcuffs, gags, sleeping pills, liquor, and Vicks vapor rub, which he put under his nose to help fend off the scent of decaying human remains. He also kept a collection of women's undergarments, according to Murderpedia. Winkles ultimately pled guilty to first-degree murder in both cases in April of 2002 and was sentenced to death a year later in April of 2003. While Winkles was willing to give details about these two crimes, he was quiet about the others. He confessed to investigators that he had abducted, raped, and killed approximately 26 women, saying that the 26 murders were committed between 1967 and 1982. However, he would not give any details of these crimes, nor names of victims or locations at which their remains might be found. In 1998, Winkles was taken out of prison to lead investigators to the locations where the bodies and heads of Graham and Delleman were found. When asked why they had brought him to Pinellas County and whether or not Winkles might be connected to Cynthia Clements or Bobbie Barkley, in addition to Elizabeth Graham and Margot Delleman, Sheriff Everett Rice told the Times, quote, "He was brought back here because he's a suspect in those 4 cases. He was a suspect then, and he's a suspect now. He's here because we have new interest in an old suspect." End quote. Back in 1982, former Sheriff Jerry Coleman told the Times that in all likelihood, all 4 of these crimes were committed by the same person. Around the time of all of this new information coming out, connecting Winkles to some crimes while suggesting his involvement in others, the Times reached out to Dan Ulian, who 16 years later still had not forgotten Bobbie. His family sold the furniture store shortly after her disappearance, feeling it was too difficult to go there anymore knowing what had happened. Asked for his thoughts nearly 2 decades later, Dan replied, quote, "It's not something you forget. Every year around that time, it bothers me. It's hard for me to drive through Pinellas Park." End quote. In June of 2013, the Times wrote a lengthy series of articles discussing Bobbie's disappearance, as now 32 years had passed and the answers were still fleeting. Gloria, 78 at the time, continued to live in the same home in St. Petersburg, using the same phone number just in case one day Bobbie were to somehow get to a phone. She still believed and clung to her hope that one day her daughter would make it back. Detective Roxanne Hunt, working the cold case, was asked about Gloria and how she's handled the lack of answers over the past 3 decades. Hunt explained, quote, "I can only imagine what it would be like to live and not know what happened to her child. You talk to her about it, and she's looking off to the side, like she's playing it back in her mind." End quote. According to Detective Hunt, 2 names were associated as possible suspects in Bobbie's disappearance. There was Mark Cutler, a petty criminal who closely resembled the sketch given by the man from the car wash the day of Bobbie's abduction. Unfortunately, when Cutler's photo was inserted into a lineup, the witness was not able to identify him as the man he had seen that day. Cutler was never charged or connected to the case and died in Citrus County in 2011. The other name, the most likely suspect in this case, was of course James Delano Winkles. A known serial killer who committed crimes very similar to Bobbie's disappearance was no longer available for interviews, as he died on Florida's death row in 2010. According to Detective Hunt, investigators are still working Bobbie's case and are planning to submit items collected from Bobbie's car for analysis with today's updated, vastly superior DNA technology. Hunt told the Times, quote, "I would like to see this case solved. I would like to bring closure to her mother. You look at her, and you can tell she's still living with it." End quote. Unfortunately, whether or not concrete answers are ever found or if Bobbie can be located remains to be seen. In May of 2013, Bobbie was added to the NamUs database, and in the years since, 8 unidentified women have been compared to her, though there have been no matches. Last month, in May of 2022, Bobbie became officially missing for 41 years, making her case one of the oldest unsolved disappearances in Florida history. To this day, her family continues to hope that they'll eventually find her, to provide her with a proper burial, and to hopefully receive some sense of closure. Barbara Jean Bobbie Barkley was last seen on Friday, May 29, 1981, at the Pipe Furniture Store in the 9600 block of 66th Street North, Pinellas Park. A witness saw Bobbie arriving for work at approximately 10 a.m., but by the time her brother Bernard arrived 3.5 hours later, the 19-year-old was gone. At the time of her disappearance, Bobbie was described as being a white female, standing 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing approximately 135 pounds. She had brown hair down to the middle of her back, feathered in the front, and brown eyes. While it's never been officially confirmed, a witness claimed that Bobbie was last seen wearing a strapless terry cloth sunsuit. Bobbie's car, a 1973 Plymouth Fury, beige with a brown vinyl top, was located in the parking lot of Studio 19, a defunct rock club off US 19 in Clearwater. A witness claims to have seen a man driving Barbara's car the day she vanished, describing him as a white male in his mid to late 20s with whitish blonde hair, standing 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighing 160 pounds. The man appeared to be beginning the growth of a light-colored beard and had a leg injury with a bandage wrapped around it at the time. He has never been positively identified, though a composite image is available. When last seen, Bobbie was 19 years old, and if alive today, she would be celebrating her 61st birthday this December. More than 4 decades have passed since Bobbie mysteriously vanished from her job at the Pipe Furniture Store, but no passage of time can ease the pain nor provide answers to questions that have haunted her family and loved ones for nearly half a century. Asked about the disappearance of her daughter and her refusal to accept that she might be deceased, Gloria told the Tampa Times, quote, "It's a possibility. Just knowing she's not in pain anymore would be a relief. I'd probably break her arms and legs after I hugged her. I'm not lying to myself when I say she's all right, because I realize maybe she's not, but it helps me keep going. When they come to me and say they found the body, then I'll cope with that." The disappearance of Barbara Barkley is one of those cases where it seems like investigators were just inches away from having what they needed. As early as the first days of the search for Bobbie, they already had a suspect in mind. Bobbie disappeared on Friday. By Monday, they had a composite, and by the end of the week, they had a more detailed composite which fit a suspect who had assaulted a real estate agent while she was at her job alone. This suspect would ultimately be arrested when he was caught red-handed in the middle of an abduction at knife point. While at the time he gave his name as David Longstreet, it would be determined that this was one pseudonym of James Delano Winkles. Another false name he'd used in the past was Jimmy Delano Hawk, admittedly not the most creative guy. When it comes to cases like this, most people are going to tell you to start close to home and work your way out. Over the years, there's been a lot of shade thrown at people in Bobbie's life, most specifically her fiancé Dan Ulian and tennis player John Skelly. I think this makes a lot of sense. Of course you're going to look at men who were either with her or had an interest in her. The problem is that some people struggle to see past that. It's become somewhat of a joke or a meme in the true crime community, the husband did it. While most people don't take this 100% seriously, others do, and oftentimes to the detriment of an investigation. It's never good to have tunnel vision no matter what side of the equation you're on. Regardless of how you view a crime, how you personally analyze it, nothing's ever 100%. Considering neither Skelly nor Ulian fit the witness description and both had alibis for where they were that morning, those rumors still continue to persist. Basically, it comes down to this. Ulian made some strange comments about Bobbie after her disappearance. He talked about her seeing other guys. He needlessly called her overweight and said she'd gained weight since they'd gotten together. While I agree that these statements were bizarre and didn't seem like they needed to be made, it's not exactly evidence of a crime. With Skelly, He falls more into the category where people think that he may have had an obsession with Bobbie, overly infatuated to the point that he both gave a trophy and a letter to her mother. Again, I agree this is strange, but you have to keep in mind that it's about the evidence fitting the suspect, not finding a way to make the suspect fit the crime without any evidence. Over the 40 years which have passed since Bobbie disappeared from the furniture store, both Skelly and Ulian have continued their lives without being arrested or charged with anything. Neither's been involved in assaults, murders, abductions. Both seem invested in locating Bobbie. Both wanted to see her return safely. Oftentimes, we want to make the connections. The victim had to have known her killer or her abductor. In Bobbie's case, a lot of people have referenced the fact that there was no sign of a struggle, so she may have gone along willingly, but this is a logical fallacy that drives me crazy in so many cases. The absence of signs of a struggle doesn't mean anyone did anything willingly. How much of a struggle is there going to be if someone pulls a gun and orders them to come with them? As we know, Winkles had a gun and a knife, which he used to gain control of his victims, but I digress. I don't want to preach to you, I just want to point out that there's always the possibility that something more is going on. For their part, it seems like regardless of what rumors were flying around at the time, investigators kept their focus on the two names they'd hit most often, Mark Cutler and James Winkles. When you look into Cutler, what you'll find is that yes, he did share similarities with the composite image of the time, and he was known to law enforcement. He has a long rap sheet, though the vast majority of his crimes are related to burglary and robbery. He was never charged with murder, nor does it appear he was a prime suspect in any case in which someone was killed. He was, however, charged with sexual assault throughout his life. This, tied in with his appearance, his location, and the details of Bobbie's disappearance, certainly made him a suspect worth pursuing. At the time, police had heard that Cutler was going around claiming that he knew what had happened to Bobbie. However, after a lot of questioning, it appeared that he really didn't seem to know much about the crime. If nothing else, much of his grandstanding was likely done in some poor attempt to gain notoriety and to make himself sound dangerous. It's not exactly uncommon for criminals to try and take credit for crimes they didn't commit to satisfy some bizarre need that a normal person simply can't understand. When it comes down to it, the man who saw the person driving Bobbie's car the day she vanished couldn't pick Cutler out of a lineup. Now, he could have been mistaken, he could have misremembered, but when the only witness you've got can't ID your suspect, you know you've got a problem. When it comes to James Winkles, though, everything changes. Winkles was familiar with Pinellas Park and had lived just a few miles from the pipe furniture store. He had a history of targeting women who were working alone or women who he could convince to get into his car for real estate deals or other work-related transactions. According to investigators, Winkles traveled with an abduction kit and had rigged his car so that his victims couldn't escape through the passenger door. He created a makeshift bed using cushions and pillows in the rear of his station wagon, which is hauntingly familiar to the way Bobbie's car was found with cushions in the back seat. I've often found myself wondering why, if Winkles had his car prepped, that Bobbie would be abducted through the use of her own car. Well, I think it's worth pointing out that when he was caught 7 months later, it was because his car battery died. If that hadn't happened, Donna Maltby may have been another victim on his list. Thankfully, she managed to escape, but it was a close call, and if he'd gotten that car started, I don't think Maltby would have survived. Now, if indeed Winkles lived 2 miles from the furniture store, he could have walked there or taken a bus with the plan of using Bobbie's car as the getaway vehicle. Maybe his car was having other problems, or maybe the battery was already starting to give him trouble. Unfortunately, he can't answer these questions, so we may never know. Another detail that I think could suggest a potential connection to Winkles is his job. At one time, he worked doing lawn maintenance while Bobbie sold outdoor furniture. It wouldn't be surprising that Winkles may have stopped in at the store from time to time, maybe because of his job, maybe because he was shopping, or possibly because he was one of the men who drove by one day and saw Bobbie outside sunbathing. It seems like Winkles, once he set his sights on someone, began his planning and didn't stop until he got what he wanted. According to police, he planned these crimes. He stalked his victims. He found the best opportunities he could. This wasn't someone who just winged it on a whim and figured it might work out. He did his homework. Sadly, if Bobbie did become a victim of Winkles, we have a fairly clear idea of what might have happened to her. She'd probably have been taken somewhere isolated, perhaps to the abandoned home, maybe to his grandmother's house, or possibly to one of those rural plots of land he later used to abduct real estate agents. After he'd committed his heinous crimes, which again tended to stretch out over 3 to 4 days, He killed his victims and buried their bodies. Then he'd return, sever the head, remove the teeth, and dispose of the skull elsewhere. He often dumped his victims' remains in rural wooded areas and rivers. Considering the scratches on Bobbie's car and the belief that it may have been driven through the woods, there's a fairly high likelihood that this may have been what happened to her. It certainly fits with Winkle's MO. If you input Winkle's Pinellas Park address and create a radius of 10 miles with his home in the middle, it's amazing what you'll find. Inside of that radius, you'll locate his grandmother's home and the abandoned home next door that he used in his crimes. You'll also find the pipe furniture store, the convenience store Cynthia Clements disappeared from, the location where Clements' body was found, the house Elizabeth Graham was abducted at, and the location where Margot Delleman's body was found. This guy didn't veer far out from his comfort zone, with the only connections outside of this radius being where they ultimately found Elizabeth's head in Lafayette County, not far from Sewanee County, where Winkle said he often went camping. As we've seen in the past with serial killers like Winkle's, they have a hunting ground that they create where they're comfortable. They follow similar patterns and trends, they commit similar crimes, and they have a type they go after. Almost all of Winkle's victims were younger women with long hair who lived or worked within 5 miles of his home. Other victims may have been matters of circumstance, seeing someone at an open house or another business and then zeroing in on them. In interviews with police, Winkle's expressed how much he enjoyed plotting out his crimes, following the victims, putting his kit together, and then executing the crimes. These were thrilling for him, and I imagine targeting lone women in places of business somehow upped the excitement. So he had it his way, either forcing them to leave with him by brandishing a weapon, or tricking them to get into his car where he'd wait until they were in a more isolated location to spring his trap. While all of this evidence adds up, and has led law enforcement to believe that, more than likely, Winkle's was the person who abducted Bobbie, there are no certainties here. He certainly sounds like the suspect who best fits the crime, but without something more, it will be difficult to make a solid link. Now, I think Winkle's, like so many other killers, lied about his true victim count. He claims to have committed 26 murders between the mid-60s and 1982 when he was finally arrested. That's certainly possible, but I doubt the number's actually that high. However, even if you cut it in half, 13 would still be a lot of victims for whose bodies have never been found or their murderer has never been caught. Could Bobbie be in that group? I don't think you can dismiss it out of hand, but you can't confirm it either. Given what's known about this case and the more than 40 years that have passed, whether or not an answer is ever discovered is dependent on a lot of different factors. Bobbie's never been found. The witness from the car wash, as far as I'm aware, has never positively identified anyone. Was he shown a lineup that included a picture of Winkle's around 82? That I can't answer, but it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't have done this unless the witness passed away or no longer wished to cooperate. Looking at Winkle's photographs, at least those that are available, one thing that stands out to me when it comes to the witness is this man had whitish blonde hair, just like the witness said. That's not confirmation of guilt, but it gives you a direction to look. Barbara Jean Bobbie Barkley vanished from the pipe furniture store in Pinellas Park, Florida on Friday, May 29, 1981. For more than 40 years, the truth of her disappearance and the person responsible have remained elusive to family, friends, and investigators. While several suspects are known, Mark Cutler and primarily James Winkle's, her remains have never been found, nor has any solid evidence been found to link any particular person to this crime. Nearly half a century has passed, and those who loved and missed Bobbie continue to hold out hope that one day they'll find out what happened. Unfortunately, without advanced DNA technology finding new evidence, new information being discovered, or someone coming forward with what they know, the vanishing of Bobbie Barkley will remain open, unsolved, and very cold. If you're looking for more information about the vanishing of Barbara Barkley, there are many news archives available which dig deep into her case. The Evening Independent and Tampa Bay Times were the most helpful in the creation of this episode, and I highly recommend them. If you have any information about the vanishing of Barbara Jean Barkley, please contact the Pinellas Park Police Department at 727-369-7864. Her case number is 1981-49062. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at TraceEvPod, message me on Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, or comment in the Facebook group. Trace Evidence would not be possible without support from amazing listeners like you. And now I'd like to take a moment to thank our fantastic Patreon producers: Alicia Lorraine, Ann Bertram, Brittany Bivens, Christine Greco, Krista Colvin, Denise Dingsdale, Donna Buttram, Diane Dyson, Eamon Brady, Eloanne Meyer, Eric Sumter, Guillerme Pinto, Haley Christie, James, Jen Trebb, Jennifer Winkler, Jill Sense, Joni Berkowitz, Julie Mangano, Kara Moreland, Lars Jensen Fangel, Leslie B., Marla Wright, Melissa Brackeisen, Nick Mohar Schurz, Orange Patches, Quinn McBreen, Roberta Jansen, Sarah Levanon, Sarah Lyons, Travis Skepko, Stacy Finnegan, Stephanie Joyner, Stephanie Eve, Adorable Susie Summers, Taylor, Tom Archer, Tom Radford, and Tracy Woods. Your contributions to Trace Evidence are invaluable, and your support of the show is both appreciated and extremely humbling. If you're interested in supporting Trace Evidence and gaining access to exclusive merch and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence or go to trace-evidence.com and click on the support option. This completes our look into the vanishing of Barbara Jean Barkley. I want to thank you again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.